Rain hammered against the tall glass windows of Kingston Industries as the boardroom filled with nervous executives. Charles Kingston, the arrogant billionaire CEO, stood at the head of the table in his tailored navy suit, his voice cutting through the room like a whip. "Marcus, stick to your mop. These machines cost more than you'll make in 10 lifetimes," he sneered, pointing at the quiet black janitor standing near the door. A few managers shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared to speak. Marcus kept his eyes low, his callous hands tightening on the handle of his cleaning cart. He had heard worse in his life, but never in front of a room full of strangers. Suddenly, an alarm wailed from the factory floor below. A $1 million production line screeched to a halt, conveyor belts frozen mid-motion. "Get the engineers down there, now!" Charles barked. Within minutes, 20 of the company's best technicians swarmed the machine, shouting over the blaring sirens, tools clattering as they tore off panels. But every fix failed. Sparks flew, the belts refused to move, and every passing second bled hundreds of thousands of dollars. Charles slammed his fist on the table, furious. "Do you idiots realize what's at stake?" Then his cold eyes darted back to Marcus, who was watching quietly from the corner. Charles smirked, his voice dripping with contempt. "What's next? We asked the janitor to save us." The room fell silent, and in that silence, Marcus stepped forward. Marcus Bennett had worked at Kingston Industries for 3 years, moving silently through the vast factory floors long after midnight, polishing corridors no one noticed, and sweeping dust no one cared about. No one at the company knew that before pushing a broom, Marcus had spent 12 years in the Army as a helicopter mechanic, fixing complex engines in the middle of war zones. No one cared to ask. To them, he was just the janitor. He lived modestly in a small apartment on the edge of town. Every paycheck stretched thin to cover tuition for his 10-year-old daughter, Leah, at a private school. She was the reason Marcus worked double shifts. "Daddy, one day I'm going to be an engineer just like you used to be," she'd tell him, her backpack almost bigger than her tiny frame. He would only smile and kiss her forehead before heading back to work. But now, as Charles Kingston raged in the boardroom high above the production line, the company was bleeding money by the minute. A critical contract, worth $50 million, depended on this machine running by dawn. 20 engineers, each earning more in a month than Marcus earned in a year, scrambled with laptops and toolkits. Sparks showered from the belt housing. The smell of burnt wiring filled the air. Nothing worked. Useless. Charles shouted, pacing the glass floor like a lion in a cage. He glanced at Marcus again, still standing by the door, mop in hand. "What's next?" He barked with a laugh that wasn't funny. "We asked the janitor to save us?" Laughter rippled uncomfortably around the table. Forced, nervous, afraid of crossing the boss. Marcus didn't respond. He simply set his cart aside and walked toward the service elevator that led to the factory floor. No one noticed at first, but as the engineers cursed under their breath and the factory alarms wailed, Marcus crouched near the stall conveyor and began quietly studying the exposed gears. His eyes followed every wire, every sensor, every bolt with the practice calm of a man who had rebuilt machines under enemy fire with nothing but a wrench in his bare hands. The clock was ticking. Hundreds of workers stood frozen, waiting for a miracle. And in that chaos, no one heard Marcus whisper to himself, "This isn't an electrical failure. It's a timing problem." He reached into his pocket for a small flashlight, leaning close to the machine's heart, as if it were speaking to him. And for the first time that night, someone noticed the janitor wasn't cleaning anymore. The shrill alarm from the factory floor cut through the night like a blade. Every failed attempt by the engineers sent a fresh wave of panic through the executive suite. Kingston Industries was hemorrhaging money, nearly $500,000 every hour the machine stayed dead. Charles Kingston barked orders into his phone, threatening to fire entire teams if production didn't resume immediately. Marcus crouched in a shadowed corner of the factory floor, unnoticed by the frantic crowd. He grabbed a piece of cardboard from a discarded shipping box and began sketching with a broken pencil stub neat, precise diagrams of gears and pulleys. He didn't need a laptop. He didn't need schematics. His memory of machines was sharper than any blueprint. As he drew, his mind slipped backward to a different kind of noise, the deafening chop of helicopter blades in Afghanistan. He remembered lying on his back under a Black Hawk in the desert, sand stinging his eyes, enemy fire echoing across the valley. The engine had seized mid-flight. The pilot had less than 20 minutes before sunset, when the landing zone would become a death trap. Everyone panicked. Everyone except Marcus. With nothing but a wrench and a stripped wire, he brought that chopper roaring back to life. The pilot called him a magician. Marcus had only smiled. Machines, no matter how complicated, always told the truth if you listened closely enough. Back in the factory, the smell of overheating metal was thick in the air. A young intern named Evan noticed the janitor's sketches. "Sir, what are you doing?" he asked hesitantly, his voice barely audible over the clamor. Marcus didn't look up. "Just drawing what your engineers can't see," he murmured. On the other side of the floor, Charles Kingston stormed down from the boardroom, his expensive shoes clicking sharply against the steel walkway. "What the hell is going on?" he shouted at the lead engineer. "Do I have to do your job for you?" Marcus stayed calm, his eyes on the conveyor's gearbox. "It's not your engineer's fault," he said quietly, almost himself. "They're solving the wrong problem." Charles spun on him, incredulous. "What did you say?" Marcus finally looked up, steady and unflinching. "This is an electrical failure. It's mechanical, a timing misalignment. If you fix the servo calibration before replacing the drive, motor, it'll run." The lead engineer scoffed. "That's ridiculous. We've run the diagnostics." "Diagnostics can't feel when a belt is a half-second off," Marcus interrupted softly, turning back to his sketch. His voice wasn't arrogant, just certain, like a surgeon describing a simple procedure. Charles laughed coldly. "You really think a janitor knows more than 20 trained engineers?" Marcus didn't answer. He finished his diagram, folded the cardboard in half, and slid it into his pocket. As the alarms blared louder and the losses mounted by the minute, he whispered to himself, so low only Evan could hear, "They have no idea how simple this is." Marcus straightened from his crouch, wiped the grease from his palms onto his janitor's uniform, and walked toward the dead machine. "Mr. Kingston," he said evenly, "I can fix this." The floor went silent. For a moment, even the alarm seemed to fade under the weight of his calm voice. Charles Kingston blinked, then burst out laughing, a sharp, cruel sound that bounced off the factory walls. "You? Fix this." He gestured to the huddle of engineers around the conveyor. "These men have PhDs. You push 'em up." Marcus didn't flinch. "It's not about degrees. It's about listening to the machine." Board members watching from the upper glass walkway exchanged worried glances. Every passing minute cost the company hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the $50 million contract would be void by morning if the line didn't start again. "Charles," one of them called nervously, "we're running out of time. Let him try. If he fails, we've lost nothing." Charles scoffed. "Fine, let's have some entertainment. Go ahead, janitor. Show us your magic trick." The engineers stepped aside reluctantly. Marcus reached for a basic toolkit hanging on the wall. Tools no one had touched all night. He didn't need fancy scanners or laptops. His hands were his instruments. He knelt beside the gearbox, his flashlight beam slicing through the haze of smoke and dust. "This machine's heart isn't broken," he explained in a low voice as he loosened the housing plate. "It's out of rhythm, like a drummer, missing the beat. You don't replace the drum, you fix the tempo." He adjusted the servo calibration by feel, rotating a drive shaft by hand until it lined perfectly with the belt teeth. Sparks hissed as he tightened the bolts, the factory lights reflecting off beads of sweat rolling down his forehead. Alarms continued to blare, while Marcus worked with unshakable precision, each motion deliberate and sure. Evan, the young intern, hovered nearby, wide-eyed. "How do you even know where to start?" "I've rebuilt engines under gunfire," Marcus replied quietly. "This is just steel and oil. Machines talk if you're willing to listen." 5 minutes later, Marcus stood up, wiped his hands, and signaled to power the system. "Start her up," he said. The lead engineer hesitated, then flipped the switch. The conveyor belts jerked once, twice, then roared to life, humming smoothly, like a beast awakening from deep sleep. Cheers erupted from the workers on the floor, and the executives above. For a moment, even Charles Kingston's mocking grin faltered. But then, a sharp bang echoed from the far end of the line, followed by a burst of smoke. The belt shuddered violently. A red warning light flashed across the control panel. Charles sneered, arms crossed. Well, looks like the janitor's miracle fix just blew up my factory. Marcus didn't move, his eyes fixed on the smoking panel. No, he muttered, reaching for his wrench again. That wasn't the machine failing. That was the safety override kicking in. And without another word, he sprinted down the line toward the source of the explosion, leaving everyone stunned. Had he saved the line or destroyed it completely? Marcus didn't slow down as he reached the smoking end of the line. The explosion was nothing more than a blown fuse and a tripped safety relay. The kind of failure that looked terrifying, but was simple to correct if you knew where to look. He yanked open an access panel, sparks snapping around his hands, and bypassed a jam sensor with precision that made even the veteran engineers gape. "Kill power for 30 seconds, he shouted, his calm voice cutting through the chaos like a drill sergeant's command. The lead engineer obeyed instinctively. Marcus tightened 2 bolts, swapped out the burnt fuse with one from his own pocket. A universal spare he carried even while mopping floors, then signaled to restart. The massive conveyor shuddered once, then glided into motion with a smooth, rhythmic hum. One by one, robotic arms sprang back to life, welding sparks dancing in perfect synchronization. The overhead monitors showed green lights, replacing red across the entire control grid. Up in the glass-wall boardroom, every executive leaned forward, holding their breath. Charles Kingston's smirk evaporated as the live production feed displayed perfect output, the assembly line cranking faster than it had all week. This can't be real, he muttered, his voice barely audible. Marcus wiped the grease from his hands and spoke into control room intercom, his tone calm and steady. Your timing array was off by 3 microseconds. That's why the drive motor overheated. Reset it manually every month, and you won't see this problem again. One of the engineers shook his head in disbelief. That's impossible to detect without a full teardown. How did you? I've heard helicopters scream louder than this, Marcus replied, almost to himself. Steel talks if you listen close enough. In the boardroom, a phone buzzed. One of the directors answered, then went wide-eyed. Charles, investors on the line. They were watching the feed. They want to know, who just saved a $50 million deal? Charles's face turned pale, his jaw working soundlessly. Down on the floor, workers erupted into cheers, clapping Marcus on the back. Cameras from the internal press team, which had been documenting the crisis for damage control, now swung to focus on the quiet janitor wiping sweat from his brow. The lead engineer turned to the cameraman, pointing. Get this man's name. Everyone needs to know who just saved Kingston Industries. As Marcus stepped back from the humming machine, a reporter from the local business network, covering the factory's contract signing remotely, spoke into her mic. Who is this janitor? And why does he seem to know more than 20 engineers combined? The question hung in the air like a thunderclap, traveling straight up to the boardroom where every executive stared at Charles Kingston. For the first time in his career, the billionaire CEO had nothing to say. The alarms were finally silent. The factory floor thrummed with the steady rhythm of a machine running flawlessly, as if nothing had ever gone wrong. Marcus stood off to the side, wiping the grease from his hand with a rag, while the engineers stared at him like he'd just performed a magic trick. Upstairs, the boardroom erupted with murmurs. One director leaned forward, eyes shining. Charles, you should thank this man publicly. He just saved the entire company. Charles Kingston's lips pressed into a thin, bitter line. He's a janitor, he muttered. The director shook his head sharply. Not anymore. He pressed the intercom. Mr. Bennett, the board would like to speak with you. Minutes later, Marcus entered the sleek glass conference room, still wearing his stained uniform. Executives in $1,000 suits rose to greet him. Marcus, said the chairman, we'd like to offer you a senior engineering position immediately. Marcus gave a small smile, humble but firm. I appreciate it, sir. I'm not looking for a title. I just love fixing things. That's all I've ever done. Just then, The elevator door slid open. Leah, Marcus's 10-year-old daughter, rushed in. One of the office assistants had called her when news spread through the building. She ran straight to her father's arms, holding up a crumpled report card. "Daddy, look." Straight A's again. The executives watched as Marcus knelt to hug her, pride softening his normally stoic face. One board member whispered to another, "He works nights just to pay for her school." That's real character. Charles Kingston shifted uncomfortably under the weight of every stare. Cameras from the press team were rolling as the chairman turned toward him. "Charles, I think an apology is in order." In front of the entire board and now a live stream of investors, the billionaire CEO's arrogance finally cracked. "Marcus," Charles said through clenched teeth, "I misjudged you. I'm sorry." Marcus nodded once. Apology accepted. His voice carried no triumph, just quiet dignity. But the investors weren't done. One of them spoke on speakerphone, his voice booming through the room. Effective immediately, we're calling a vote of no confidence in Charles Kingston's leadership. This company deserves better than arrogance. The vote was unanimous. Charles was finished. The same board he had bullied for years replaced him on the spot. Turning back to Marcus, the chairman smiled. "If you won't take the senior engineer job, then at least accept this. Full scholarship for Leah through college, funded by the company you just saved. And if you ever change your mind about a leadership role, the door is wide open." Leah squealed and hugged her dad tighter. "Daddy, you fix more than just a machine." Marcus looked around the room, the suits, the flashing cameras, the humbled CO, and simply said, "I just did what needed to be done." Weeks later, the factory floor looked different. The alarms were gone, the machines ran smoother than ever, and Marcus Bennett now walked among the engineering team, not as a janitor, but as their quiet mentor. He still wore coveralls, but this time they were company-issued, crisp and new, with Chief Systems Specialist stitched above his name. Leah often visited after school, walking proudly at her father's side, greeting the workers who now treated Marcus with admiration instead of indifference. Cameras from a local news crew caught him crouched by a robotic arm, explaining a calibration trick to a young engineer, the same way he'd once explained homework to his daughter at the kitchen table. The narrator's voice rose over the hum of the factory. "People are quick to judge by uniforms, by titles, by where someone stands a room. But talent doesn't wear a label, and character doesn't need applause." Marcus Bennett proved that real worth isn't found on a business card. It's in what you give others, even when no one is watching. A montage rolled. Marcus guiding his new team, Leah holding her scholarship certificate, the disgraced Charles Kingston leaving the building for the last time, cameras flashing around him. The final shot lingered on Marcus smiling as Leah handed him a wrench, both of them laughing as he tightened the bolt on a machine now running flawlessly. "Never judge people by their job title," the narrator concluded. "Talent and integrity shine everywhere, even from someone holding a mop." A brief pause and a warm, inviting close. If you enjoyed the story of hidden talent and justice, subscribe for more stories that prove greatness can come from anywhere.